Welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm your friend and host, Liz Ficken, and I'm so glad you're here. Uniquely Qualified is a podcast that empowers guests to share their experience, strength, and hope in overcoming challenges in the spirit of mutual healing. We hope that you'll leave feeling more aware, connected, and supported in navigating the human experience. Today, we are focusing our discussion on the story of Camille, who, among many things, is a military spouse. But before we begin her interview, I want to share some brief, high level facts on the United States military that may be helpful context for listeners. There are 5 branches of the United States Armed Forces. There's the Navy, the Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Coast Guard. Each serve a specific function as a part of the Department of Defense, and within each branch are a wide array of duties, functions, and assignments for personnel. According to the Department of Defense, about 1.3 million individuals are currently serving in the United States Armed Forces, with around 1 million military spouses, which include active duty, reserve, and National Guard spouses. There are currently about 16.2 million veterans and more than 11 million people that are currently spouses of veterans. According to the 2020 census, the United States Census Bureau counted 331.4 million people in the United States, which means that roughly about 10% of the United States population falls into one of those categories of either being a veteran, spouse of a veteran, active duty military, or active duty military spouse. So it feels important to mention that this is excluding family members, including children, which would, of course, make that number larger still. And 10% of the population, or about 30 million people, that's not an insignificant number. And so this is something that, whether we are aware of it on a day-to-day basis or not, impacts members of our communities. I do want to take this opportunity to shout out a few members of the uniquely qualified community and listeners who are also military spouses or active duty. Boke, my friend Boke, is currently living in Florida, a place she might not have necessarily chosen for herself, where her husband not stationed at the Homestead Air Reserve Base. I also want to shout out Natasha, a friend of mine whose military spouse is a Green Beret, and in the few years that I've known her, I've seen him get deployed a number of times while she has been at home with their 5 children. Boke and Natasha, thank you for your service. And I also just want to take this opportunity to some love to my buddy Rich, who received a Bronze Star Medal for his valor in combat during the war in Afghanistan. And he's currently deployed overseas right now with a wife and 2 children remaining home in Oregon. So, Camille, Boke, Natasha, and Rich, thank you for your service. Thank you for being part of the uniquely qualified community. So now to our fabulous guest, Camille. Camille lives in Hawaii with her husband John, 3-year-old son Jack, and their chocolate lab Bree. Hawaii is the 7th state she's called home in the last 12 years due to her husband's career with the U.S. military. Camille grew up in Minnesota, where she graduated from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism. She's worked in marketing for the entirety of her career, but her ultimate dream would be to publish one of the manuscripts she's written. In her spare time, Camille likes to read, write, hike, or head to the beach with her family. Welcome to the podcast, Camille.
Hey, thank you.
So, Camille, how are you uniquely qualified?
I am uniquely qualified as a military spouse for the last 12 years.
Thank you. I think we just all have a lot to learn about what that has been like for you, and I appreciate you being willing to come on and chat about it.
Yeah,
I
thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's my honor. And I know in pre-show we discussed how we just want to take this quick second before we really get into the specifics to talk about how there might be things that you and I discuss right now while we're recording that later we need to cut in post-production because that's kind of the nature of being a military spouse. Do you mind sharing your thoughts on that, just in terms of saying things, not saying things, secrecy?
Yeah, so there's a term military spouses know called OPSEC, and it just means that sometimes you need to omit details
Mm,
about locations or dates or movements to protect the safety and secrecy of missions involved with the military. So in our conversations, there is, a couple locations that I'll need to just kind of omit from our conversation, just because there are still service members actively having missions there, and it just is for their safety and the importance of the safety of their families.
Thank you. Thank you for already, like, that's a new term to me. Thank you for educating me on that. And I also, just for our listeners, wanted to flag that in case we're going along, you're listening, and you're like, wait, this dialogue is a little, seems to have gone from some place to another place kind of randomly. And that could be that I needed to cut something out based on what we just described. So Camille, let's start with the origin because there's no military spouse without the spouse. So how did you meet your
Yes.
husband?
We have actually, it's kind of a fun story. So we met at an academic competition in high school when I was a senior and he was a junior. We met in
Hmm.
Miami Beach, Florida. Both of our respective states had won their state competitions. The event was called Life Smarts. I'm not sure if you're familiar. It's kind of a niche, like academic competition, but we'd each won like our state competitions and we were competing against each other and we ran into each other at the competition. This is where it gets a little cliche and corny teenage first love type. He was wearing a shirt that said, "I lost my number. Can I have yours?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. And I had said, he can have mine. And one of my teammates ran over in just typical teenage high school fashion and was like, "Oh, she wants your number." And yeah, the rest is kind of history. We exchanged numbers at the competition. We started to hang out there. This was a school-sponsored event, but there may have been a little bit of kissing. And then we kept texting after we went home. And that's really where it began.
That is adorable. So you were representing Minnesota,
Yes,
and
yeah, that's
where's
where.
he from? What state was he repping?
He is actually a military brat, which is a term, it's an affectionate term
Yeah.
for kids who grow up in the military. His dad was a Marine and he grew up half of his life at bases in California. And then the last few years when I met him, his family was living in Southern Alabama, Mobile,
Oh,
Alabama.
okay. That is a really cute origin story.
Yeah, it's one that we definitely love telling. It is a little cheesy, but I feel like it makes it cute and fun that it was just this organic kind of not first love, love at first sight, but more so like chemistry at first sight, just kind of a connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also says to me that you're both pretty smart and intelligent and maybe a bit competitive.
All of those things are true.
Oh, really?
Definitely on the competitive side of things for sure.
And did either of you win? I don't, also, if that's a sore subject, we can.
No, no,
Okay.
no. We both lost. Probably too distracted, I would say. Yeah, I think it was Maryland won that year. So
Oh, well, you ultimately walked away from the competition with the love of your life in
yes,
hand.
I
So
did.
you guys may be the real winners.
So true. Yes. Yeah, this was April of 2010. And again, at this time, I was about to graduate high school. My husband, he's a year younger than me. He was a junior. He was graduating in December, just a semester early. But we were still technically living at home at this time when we started this long distance relationship. And then we started to visit each other roughly every 3 months. And again, like living in our parents' homes at this time. We're
Hmm.
minors the first time he came to Minnesota and saw me. So it was kind of unconventional, I would say, but
Yeah.
we're truly in love. It sounds like a little crazy now. I have, looking at my own child, I'm like, I can't imagine you telling me you're in love with the love of your life, but in teenage years, it's kind of insane, but we just knew we had an incredible connection and there was something special there. So we started to visit each other every 3 months. But yeah, it kicked off April 2010.
2010. And then, so you then probably graduate high school in the next few months.
Yep, I graduated in May and I started at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and I was working on a degree in journalism.
Mhm.
And my husband was still kind of deciding, or husband, sorry, boyfriend at the time, was still trying to decide, where his life would take him. And he was hoping to come near me and come and live near me and hopefully go to school near me. But his family would have preferred, because he had a couple scholarships to schools nearby, that he stay close to home, go to school there after he graduated. But if you have met or know my husband at all, he's very stubborn. When
Mhm.
he can't get the thing he wants, he's definitely not going to go with the direction people are pushing him. Roughly a little over a year and a half later, we had been dating that whole time, visiting each other periodically. He enlisted. He chose to
Okay.
enlist instead of pursue school at that time.
Okay. And it sounds like maybe there's a little like contrarianism to like my family's telling me to do this, I'm going to do this, but
Yeah.
you're also telling us that he's a military brat. So,
This was a dream of his.
okay, that
I would say it was it was both, you know. It was more so that he knew he wanted to travel and establish a career, and he knew he wanted to go outside of where he had grown up. In those last few years in Alabama, he wanted to move away from that, experience new things. And we had discussed his dream of his, you know, to enlist at some point, but he
hmm
had always thought he would maybe go get an engineering degree, go a different route. And then just kind of the events of not wanting to go to school nearby kind of propelled him into the decision to enlist in the military. And I, at that time, you know, we'd been dating for a year and a half. I was just fully supportive of him. We weren't engaged yet. We weren't married. I was pursuing my own degree, my own career. I knew I was getting a degree before I got married. So I just wanted to support him however I could. And so I said, okay, you know, we're still long distance either way. So we might as well just keep dating and, you know, I'll just be here for you.
yeah. I think one thing I also just want to highlight for people, so I haven't mentioned this yet, but my younger brother is a Marine Corps veteran. He served for 4 years. Because of grad school, I am fortunate to know a number of vets in a more academic setting. And I guess I'm bringing that up to say I had this misconception that military is you're 18 years old, you enlist, and you either do increments of four, but it's could be career for life. What I learned later because of having those people in my life was that some people that dream is I'm going to go and I'm going to go to undergrad first, or I'm going to go and I'm going to get my law degree and then I'm going to enter. So I guess I just want people to to hear that in case they don't know,
Yeah.
because it took me being an adult to be like, oh, okay, people can come into the military in all different ways. So it can be totally true that your husband had the dream and also wasn't necessarily going to enlist right out of high school, or there was like some
Yeah.
decisions there.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, since then he's gotten his associates, he's working on his bachelor's now. So it's definitely not a linear path for everyone, I
hmm
think. And, you know, I'd say even in today's day and age, I feel like less people are choosing just the very natural from high school to college path. And it's probably even more widely accepted to do other things. But like you said, there's definitely a lot of different trajectories for people who end up being in the military.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to move us forward in talking about you, but for what it's worth, I went straight from high school to undergrad. I went to a private college. I accumulated a bunch of debt. My little brother served in the Marine Corps, used the GI Bill. He is now an engineer and he doesn't have the debt that I have the fortunate of carrying.
It is a
Um,
huge perk. Yes. I mean,
so
they definitely, yeah, I would
yeah,
agree with that approach
yeah.
too.
The older
It
he
can be
gets, the more
money
I'm like,
saving.
wait, you put in those 4 years and now like he's in the process of buying a home and he gets like the VA loan benefits. And I don't mean to take us too far afield, but where I'm like, wait, hang on, you served your country for 4 years and now like for the rest of your life you get to enjoy certain benefits. That seems like a
Yeah.
really smart idea, little bro.
Definite
Anyways,
perks there. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, for
yes,
sure.
yes, and earned, definitely earned.
Earned, yes,
Yeah,
first.
but there are perks, but they're earned.
Mhm.
So what branch did your husband end up enlisting in?
The Army.
The Army, okay. So
Yes.
he
And
stepped away from his legacy in the Marine Corps, went into the Army.
yes. It's also worth noting his older brother is in the Army as well
Oh,
and had enlisted a few years before him. So yeah, he had a little bit of, you know, a mentor in that way as well. But he joined the Army in unmanned aerial systems, which UAS, basically drones is surveillance drones. And that's kind of where he started his career. So he went to training. He was in training after he enlisted between basic and then AIT, which is the advanced individualized training that is furthers people in the specific area of the military that they've enlisted in or chose to, you know, the subsect of the career they've chose to follow. But he finished with that about 9, 10 months after he enlisted. And his first duty station was Fairbanks, Alaska. And yes, so he went from Mobile, Alabama to training in various states to then being sent to Alaska. And when he got sent to Alaska, I was about to start my senior year of college.
You were. Okay.
Yeah, so for anyone trying to do the math, I graduated in 3 years from college instead of four.
Oh, good for you.
Yes, I got in a year of it done in high school, doing various programs in Minnesota that allow you to take like all your, what's that called, generals, while you're
Yeah.
still in high school. So I had a year already under my belt when I started college. So yeah, it was fall of 2013. He had moved to Alaska. I was starting my senior year, and I visited him there. So I kind of had a general idea of what my future might look like in
Mm-hmm.
Alaska. And that's when we really started to talk seriously about me joining him and us potentially getting married.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I feel like that's a real test too. Like if you're in Fairbanks, it's not like you're where you're currently stationed now in Hawaii. You're in
Oh,
the cold. I mean, you're from Minnesota though. What was that like going to Fairbanks from the
oh, it
Twin
was
Cities?
Yeah, it was very different. So,
Okay.
I would say it's different. It is
Yeah.
very different.
Okay.
So to kind of get us there, we ended up getting engaged winter of 2012, 2013, and then we were married 5 months later, May 26th, 2013. So if you're doing the math, that's 3 years after we met, 3 years of long distance. We were very young. We were very, very young. But we believe this was the real deal. This was different. I would say we are the exception, not the rule. I think statistics would agree with me there,
Hmm.
but we were just really serious about our love for each other and wanting to be together. So the week after I graduated college, we got married. And then
Oh.
a couple weeks after that, I moved to Alaska to be with him. And I can say after 12 years, that move was the hardest move of my time as a military spouse because not only was I transitioning into marriage, which is you're
Mm-hmm.
learning how to live a life with someone else to take into account at all times. I was also taken and chose to leave, all my family and friends and my support system in Minnesota. I had never lived in any other state up until this
Mm-hmm.
point. So it was just very difficult for me.
Yeah.
I really struggled. I would say like the first 6 months into the first winter, just trying to find my bearings. I mean, I was happy in the marriage and we had a lot of fun together, but I just didn't have much else. And
Mm.
so it was hard. It was very hard. Military spouses are really a unique breed of people just having their lives completely uprooted. And that was my first taste of it. That was my
Mm-hmm.
first understanding of the sacrifices that I would be making to be with someone I loved.
Mm-hmm.
I did not come from a military family. I think, let me rephrase, I do have one grandfather who served in the Navy, but he didn't talk about it very much. It was a brief service. And
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, there was just no one in my community who was military related. So I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
have any mentors or people to talk to or to understand what this fully entailed. And moving to Alaska was really that just ripping off the band-aid of understanding what
Yeah.
this required.
Yeah. Man, that does sound like a really hard transition. I feel like I don't know many people who the time from undergrad to like adult life is the easiest anyway. I just sounds like
Mhm.
that was a lot of change for you really quickly. I would also
Yes.
be curious to know, um, do you think you would have gotten married at like on that timeline if it wasn't about the military? Because
No,
okay,
probably
okay,
not.
okay.
Genuinely, we knew we would stay together, and I think we wanted to start a life together, and we would have moved in together. But I was leaving school, and at that time, I was unemployed, and we wouldn't have known financially, kind of what the next steps were. And this is a stigma, I think, with people who maybe hear about military spouses. There are benefits to getting married in the sense of military members are often then they get an increase in what's called the basic allowance for housing, that you get more if you have dependents. A spouse or
Hmm.
children is a dependent. So you make more money if you have those dependents, which is kind of an incentivized reason to
Yeah,
partake in something like this. There's also the fact that then you can provide healthcare benefits to your spouse and your family. And,
yeah.
there are people who believe that people try to scam the system for this reason. I've never met in my 12 years at the military, anyone who's ever married into the military for this reason, they love their spouse, they chose to do it. I think sometimes timelines are escalated to procure some of these benefits or to establish themselves financially to make sure that they can get a first place together. But I know people who just continue to date people in the military who don't feel burdened by that timeline either. So I think there
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit of a push. My husband grew up a little more traditional, so I think for him, I don't think he thought much of it to get married young. My parents were married right out of college too, but
Mm-hmm.
by that point, 2010, this is a pretty progressive era. This isn't like the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s. This is, people aren't getting married that young, and we were aware people were not getting married that young. But I think it was the real deal for us, and we felt that this would
Totally.
put us in a good position. So let's move forward with this now, because the alternative was we were just going to do it maybe a year later, maybe a year later.
Yeah.
So it was like, why not now versus a year later?
That completely makes sense. And I hope that there wasn't any
No,
tone
no,
or
no.
intonation of
I
judgment.
think it's good to maybe address that, because I think there are stigmas that people would marry for that reason. And I hope no one's truly doing that. And I hope,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like the other perception, my perception of incentive to um if you're really in a really serious relationship, whether you're young or whether you're older. I was gonna try to pick an age, like whether you're 33. Um, but it's a job where one partner is probably gonna be moving a lot. And to the point where we were making earlier about privileged information for spouses, if you were just dating and he was deployed or something happened to him, my perception, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that as girlfriend or even fiance, you're not getting that information if something happened to him. You're not
I
able
mean, that's
to be with
true.
him.
Yeah, you're more removed from that because it's typically like his parents or his brother or someone who's a blood relative at that point who would be more privy to the
Hmm.
first line of information. And that is true. Yeah, it is true. I think yeah, I mean, there's many reasons, and our core reason for getting married was love,
Yeah,
and to this
absolutely.
day, it maintains that. I do think, for us, we were also sick of long distance after three
Yeah,
years, and
that's a long
so,
time.
and we were just ready. We were just ready to be together. We were like, okay, let's just do this, and I
Yeah.
mean, it worked out
Yes.
amazingly, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it is an interesting thing though. And I think even 10 years later, people would look at that age and be like, oh, wow, like that. I mean, I endured a few comments from college friends that were really disheartening and not very encouraging at all, but I tried not to let those comments bother me too much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I just try to embrace the like to each their own. I had friends who
yeah.
got married right out of undergrad. I've had friends that got married during undergrad. I've had friends that
Mhm.
dated for 10 years after they met and they were like, we want to get married and then have a family right away. So like just everybody's going to do it differently. I just feel
Yeah.
like there are few careers that I can think of in the world where
Hmm.
like the job is like a part of like when you set a date for a wedding as when
Yeah.
like the military is involved.
Yeah.
So that's I guess what I was
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've gotten your journalism degree, you moved to Fairbanks. Can you talk to us a little bit about, I know that was a really tough time, but are you employed? Are you using your journalism degree?
Yeah.
What are the decisions you're making about your career?
Yeah, I started job searching immediately. So I got there early June, I want to say, after we got married, started job searching immediately. It's a very small city. Anyone who doesn't know geographical makeup of Alaska, this is a city sort of in the center of Alaska, maybe a little bit to the south. This is a massive state. And this city is the population of maybe 40,000, maybe in the metro area. I think it's called the Fairbanks North Star Borough, maybe 50,000. This is not large. This is
No.
small. There's a Walmart, there's a Sam's Club, there's a Fred Meyer. That's about it. So
Mm-hmm.
my options felt limited. I just gotten a degree in journalism. There was an emphasis in my journalism degree in marketing and advertising,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew that would probably serve me better there. So I started to look into if there are advertising agencies, marketing positions. There was a single advertising agency, and I sent my resume, and they said, "Hi, we're not hiring right now. Thank you so much. We'll keep this on file." Continued to apply. And then maybe 6 weeks after I arrived, I get a call from that advertising agency that someone is leaving and they'd love to have me come in and interview. And amazingly, just to get to the point, I got the job, and that job truly, truly was a saving grace in
Mm.
Alaska. Even though I was still struggling with, being away from family and friends, as I learned to embrace my coworkers as friends and took advantage of their opportunities to hang out, or if I needed something, and I mean, when I say they were there for me, they were there for us. Even on a day
Mm-hmm.
my car, couldn't start and somebody's coming to pick me up, I mean, it was just a real sense of community at this like boutique agency there. And I feel like having that job gave me so much self-confidence and really helped me to establish myself individually apart from my husband and his career. And
Mm-hmm.
that laid the groundwork, I think, for the rest of our marriage and the rest of his time in the service. And that me having a career and me having a thing that was really not his, not anything to do with military, was so vital in
Mm-hmm.
not only my mental health, but just how we've made this work so well for so long.
Yeah. Are there any other parts of that time in your early marriage, first station, is it station assignment? Is that a
Yeah,
phrase?
yeah, you could
Or
say station, base.
station?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, station is actually probably the most accurate.
Are there other parts of being stationed in Fairbanks that you're like, this was foundational for our relationship, for me being a military spouse? Like, were there other military spouses that you met? Did you learn how to make friends in a new area?
I will say that I maybe was not the best military spouse to other military spouses in Alaska. And I say that because we chose not to live on base. I chose to basically follow a career
Hmm.
and get a career. And I have since learned a lot about military spouses, but I think in that first base, I maintained some of my own prejudices and my own
Mm.
stereotypes about what military spouses might look like. So I don't feel like I reached out to people in the same way they were reaching out to me. I really clung to my coworkers at my job who they were local. They were not related to the military world at all. They were
Hmm.
all people who've lived in Alaska for a couple generations. I really focused more on those relationships. And I'd say, I'll probably talk about this later as well, but since then, since having a child, I have learned so much about what an incredible group military spouses are. And we are not all the
Mm.
same. And we don't have, just all of these values that people might assume we do. It's a great, incredible group of resilient women and men. And I
Hmm.
think I was hesitant when I first moved to Alaska to really embrace that because I didn't want to be seen as a typical spouse. There's some
Hmm.
derogatory terms that people use about military spouses, like a dependa, like you are dependent on your husband's income. And I was so determined to, separate myself from that. I feel like I sometimes closed off friendships that I otherwise could have really needed and really taken advantage of and really learned and grew from at that time. But I have since learned a lot. And I now, some of my best, like closest friends when I move are military spouses. But it took me just, I think, having to go through it and realize that I should be embracing these people and learning about them and learning about this culture instead of trying to like differentiate myself from it. It's a
Hmm.
balance. I'm not sure if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And how old were you? 22 at the time?
Yes,
Yeah.
22.
Always say like things that we do before our brains are fully developed at 25, like you can let yourself off the hook. You've learned your lesson since then. You were doing the
Yes.
best you could with your 22-year-old newly married brain. You're fine.
Yes. It's a good way to put it.
So how long were you in Fairbanks and at this job?
I was there for 2 years. So my
Okay.
husband had been there a full year prior to me. And typically for his specific job, he is somewhere for roughly 3 years, sometimes as little as two. So it was three
Okay.
years in Alaska. And when that came up, we found out we were moving to Washington State to Joint Base Lewis McChord. And we were ecstatic. That had been one of our top choices. Literally so excited. It was hard to say goodbye to my coworkers. At this
Mm-hmm.
time, remote work, especially for the boutique agency I was at, our clients were very local, very much like I'm visiting them multiple times a week. This was not a position I could just carry with me.
Yeah.
So I did have to resign, But I mean, I left with wonderful memories of those
Yeah.
coworkers. I still have one who sends my son Christmas gifts. I mean, just an
So
incredible group of
sweet.
people. But we moved to Washington at that point. So that was in July of 2015. We drove down. Fun drive. Takes about 4 days. You
I
don't
would say
have
drive.
service. Yeah, it's quite a journey.
Wow.
Um, and in Washington, we found our stride. I would say we found our
Mm,
stride in our careers, our marriage, our friendships. I mean, Washington is such a highlight. To be frank, we hope to move back there one day and
mm-hmm.
establish our family there long term. We loved it. We ended up getting
Mm-hmm.
a house in Puyallup, very close to, maybe this is too much info for some of your like non-Northwest listeners, but we got a house in Puyallup. I got a job in downtown Seattle. That's where I met our mutual friend, Shannon, and I truly thrived in that state. I mean, we just had the best time. We worked hard. I mean, we were both long hours at our jobs, but we were young. We didn't even
Mm-hmm.
have a dog or kids. It was a fun time in our lives and in our marriage for sure.
Well, that sounds so great.
Yeah.
And joint base, there aren't that many joint bases, right? And this is well, I guess
There
that ultimately doesn't matter. But what are the two branches of the military that are on Joint Base Lewis McChord?
I believe it's Air Force and Army. Lewis
Okay.
is the Army base. McCord is the Air Force base. And that base is fairly large. I think it's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
big industry in that Tacoma area, just the
Mm-hmm.
defense industry in general.
Mm.
What's funny is I was on the base in Alaska all the time because it was small and it was just, you could go to the grocery store. I never went to the base. At JBLM, we lived off post and I think I can count on one hand how many times I went on the base there. I sought healthcare off base. I was just very removed from it there. I made an
Mm-hmm.
incredible group of friends at the ad agency I worked with our mutual friend. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was just even talking about it, I feel like I'm just smiling because
You're
we
lighting up.
we had so much fun there. I've met seriously one of my best friends in the world now. She still lives in the Seattle area, and we visit her periodically. She visits us too. Yeah, it's just a really fun time. There was,
Mm.
however, I mean, to be blunt, a deployment, our first deployment there.
Okay.
And that was probably, at the time, it didn't feel that way, of course. It's our first big, you know, the first time we're apart from each other for a very long period. But of the three deployments I have dealt with as a military spouse, that was probably the easiest because I was so entrenched in work and friendships, and I had no responsibilities outside of caring for myself. I didn't even have to worry about boarding a dog like I did
Yeah.
later on down the road. I could just focus on planning trips for me and focus on how to make myself happy and healthy. And it is easier when you can just fixate on yourself, I would say.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. So that deployment, again, my husband, he was in Iraq. I can mention that one for 8 months.
Okay.
There was definitely an air of, worrying about his safety at that time. That was in 2017. He was deployed
Mm-hmm.
from early January 2017 to September of 2017.
Okay.
And I mean, I think distraction was key, just distracting myself and staying really busy
Mm-hmm.
was kind of how I survived that first deployment.
Mm-hmm. And I know that just like not every military spouse is the same or military member is the same. Each deployment is different. So, to what extent were you able to communicate with him during this one? And to the extent that you can talk about it, were you aware of him like going into combat? Like how like his bodily safety was being impacted by him being deployed? Can you talk
Mhm.
about that?
So I can talk about how much we were able to communicate, which
Okay.
was we used WhatsApp and we were able to text pretty much almost every day, except if there was something they do things, I think it's called a blackout. I can mention this is basically
Mm-hmm.
where if something happens, they have to remove all communications until whether something happened to a soldier, whether it was, something of security for the mission. Sometimes phones were taken away for that reason. I might be using the wrong term there, by the way, but I just know it was essentially like a window where they might not be able to talk to you. And so I was always prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
Phone calls were less frequent and FaceTimes were very not I want to say it was pretty infrequent. I do remember like I missed a phone call once early on and I was dropped groceries and was like sobbing in my kitchen.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, I just
Yeah.
remember. Um,
Yeah. That would be really scary.
yeah, I just think that first deployment, I was young and I didn't understand like how safe he would or wouldn't be. And
Hmm.
so just not knowing, I I would say it was still the easiest because I could distract myself the easiest, but there's always that just like lingering fear of like, why are you calling me? Or what is it, does something happen? Not wanting to miss a call or a FaceTime. They were more infrequent. I can't remember this far removed from it, but I know it was like you didn't want to miss it. Let's put it that
Hmm.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And that would be really, I imagine anybody who's gone through something like this, where it's like you know they might be in harm's way, but you don't have all the information. Like you and I are planners, and we like to have all the T's crossed and I's dotted.
Uh,
But to, like it's like it sounds like it's a little ambiguous. Like might be available, might not be available. There's
Lots of
communication,
uncertainty. Yeah.
lots of
And
uncertainty. There you go.
I
Yeah,
can say he was at the base, if you will, that they have over there most of the time, but it was in a very unsafe area. So,
totally.
yeah, it was just, yeah. I mean, there was a lot he couldn't tell me during that. He told me later that was just like, oh my God.
Hmm.
But I think not knowing probably worked to my advantage, just like a little bit of ignorance at the time and
Yeah.
distraction and just hoping he was okay. And not missing any calls, which even today, I guess it's just remembering that feeling of, you didn't know when you would hear from them again over a long period. It was just hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's one thing that people might not consider. Say you have like a coworker who has a spouse that's deployed, like they're living with that running in the background of their mind. And so just be gentle if you have people in your life where somebody is deployed and there's that uncertainty.
100%. Yeah,
Mm.
that's such a good thing to remind people. And again, I had the most incredible support system there. So many people who were
Hmm.
checking in on me. And, it was incredible. I was in downtown Seattle. I'm in an area that's probably pretty progressive, but all
Hmm.
my coworkers that I worked with on the daily knew my husband was deployed and they were wonderful. I mean,
Good.
wonderful to me, whether they agreed with it or not. You never know how people feel about certain politics or wars, or we weren't in a war. I do want to be specific. It was just a combat zone, but you don't know
Hmm.
how people feel about it, but everyone was so supportive of me. It was really just like a testament to like the human condition. Like you can care for people even if maybe you don't agree or don't feel the same way about, their spouse's career. Like it was wonderful how supported I felt.
I'm so glad that you had that support. That's like a very good example of what I hope other military spouses
Yeah.
receive. And you said he was deployed for 8 months.
8 months. Yep.
Okay.
And then he came home September of 2017. And around that same time, I actually left the agency I had been working at. We had found out we would be moving to Arizona the following spring. So I chose to be
Okay.
proactive and pursue a new position that was remote. I actually started working remotely in 2017. I really beat the everybody else on the remote work front. And
Yeah.
yeah, I found a position that was looking for someone remote. There would be a lot of travel involved, or not a lot, but a decent amount of travel, maybe 15-20% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a company based out of randomly South Dakota, Sioux Falls
Mm-hmm.
area. And yeah, I was able to time that. So when we moved from Washington, very sad day, still remember how gut-wrenching that was and how much I cried
Yeah.
when we pulled out of Puyallup and left our home. When we moved to Southern Arizona, I was able to bring my job with me, which was fantastic. Like truly just so much stress you can leave behind when you know that like career financially, like it's set. I just took a couple days off to help with the transition, and then I just got right to work on a computer, even though we didn't have our stuff at the time. So that was great.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to have that consistency and that you were among the first movers in the remote workspace.
I have to say, I do want to make a comment here. As people are moving, back to work, I think they really underestimate the populations that have benefited so much from remote work. Military spouses are often overlooked in this conversation. I feel like people are aware of parents that need jobs that are remote and provide
Sure.
flexibility. And I've also seen a lot of arguments about people with disabilities, and I completely
Hmm.
support those two groups. They need remote work options. The military spouses need remote work options too. We genuinely are able to, just as I explained to you when I got that job in
Hmm.
Alaska, we can have self-confidence, we can have autonomy, we can have financial independence, we can support our families. There's so much value to maintaining remote work for people in groups that I am in. And I just think it's really unfortunate that CEOs are pushing for everyone to go back in office when this really hurts people like me and people in the military spouse
Yeah.
community.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. That is such an excellent point where, yeah, that it just I can imagine being able to take your job with you, knowing that you're going to have to move. This is a part of my life. This is a part of my spouse's career is the moving, and to not have to every single time sever a connection, find a new job. Like that's just so empowering and important. So I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah, it was really helpful. Arizona was a training base for my husband. He was training in on a new type of aircraft, and so we were there for a very set amount of time. So we knew we would be moving twice in a year. Yeah, it was huge that I had this remote job. It was so helpful mentally to be able to handle two moves cross country. We also acquired a dog in Arizona, which again, a dog is
Yay.
nothing to the level of having a kid and moving, but there are new hurdles than when you move with the dog as well. And all of that was alleviated. A lot of that was alleviated by knowing that I had this job. So after our time in Arizona, we went to Texas. We moved to Central Texas. The base was Fort Hood. Um, that base, it doesn't have a great reputation within the military community.
Oh,
We
really?
managed, no, people don't love being stationed there for a
Okay.
multitude of reasons. And I had so many misconceptions when we moved to Texas about what Texas would be like. I was
Mm.
feeling a little negative, not thinking I would fit in well. And we ended up loving Texas, which is
Hmm.
just so bizarre when you move somewhere that you end up kind of falling in love with. We chose a city a little bit removed from the base. It was a little bit of a commute for my husband, but it was worth it for us. We were near the freeway that went right down to Austin. We bought a boat there. We
Oh,
just
love.
yeah, we just like found these little niches that really made Texas home
Hmm.
for us while we lived there. And again, for timeline, we moved to Texas the very end of 2018. So we're
Okay.
living there into 2019. And the reason I mentioned the year, obviously, is we're approaching the global pandemic in my story. My
Hmm.
husband had another deployment and he deployed in January of 2020.
Oh
So
my
he
God.
deploys, and at first, I'm good. I've got trips planned this is only a 6-month deployment. I have trips planned throughout the whole deployment. I go up to Minnesota for a few weeks and spend time with family. Again, I have this remote job. Shout out to
Yeah.
remote work. I could write
We
a
love work.
dissertation on my love for remote work.
Yeah.
It was really, really helpful to be able to have family support when he had first
Mhm.
left, went back to Texas. And then, as we all know, the world shut down.
It did.
My husband's deployed in another country as the world shuts down. And, it was so interesting to endure a deployment during this insane global event because for once, this is going to sound a little odd. I felt like everyone knew what it was like to be alone in something. I know that sounds
Ooh,
kind of strange,
yeah.
but we were all together dealing with this, and I felt like my husband being deployed was hard, and I'm self-isolating with the dog. I mean, me and my dog had full conversations at this point,
Yeah.
right? Like we're in
Get
our house.
that.
But it was like everyone was going through it. And so whenever I started to self-loathe, I'm like, wait a second, my friends are in their apartments dealing with this. I
Mm,
am not the only person who's lonely, and I would have been lonely with the deployment regardless. So it was this weird, like, this really sucks because there was also weird things happening with this deployment. I can't talk about this one much, but like rules for him and the safety of him in countries. Well, the pandemic is just running rampant, but there was like a weird unity. And maybe other people felt that too. Like, this is bad and it's scary, but we're not alone in this. We're
mm,
all in it together apart, I guess. And I,
yeah.
I tried to really lean into that feeling, and I scheduled so many like virtual game nights and virtual things like
Yeah.
for the 2 months where everyone was sort of on lockdown. I think it was roughly like March and April before. It kind of depended on the state you were in, right? When things started.
Yeah.
I was in Texas and it was warm, so I will be honest with you all, got by May, we're outside. They were letting us do a lot of outdoor things. And I think we probably had it a little easier than a lot of the northern states at that point. But yeah, I think that deployment was just particularly hard because we had another huge, scary, crazy thing happening. And also, my husband is serving in an even more secretive deployment. And I heard from him roughly the same amount, but he really couldn't talk about anything in this one. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was just sort of a double-edged sword.
I I I really appreciate your perspective and that you were allowed to recognize that in that moment because we were all alone but together. And for me it was like so cool. I just remember at one point looking at the news and thinking, "Oh, people in Italy are feeling this way. People in Japan are impacted too." And where it really felt what was unfortunately to be going through a global pandemic, we were all in it together.
And that's
Um,
not, and I do want to add, that's not to discount. It was very scary.
It was so
People losing
hard.
their
Yeah.
lives, and everyone knows someone of someone who, was
Yeah.
very ill or developed long COVID or passed away. Like, I don't want to minimize that, but there was just a weird thing to be able to focus on, that I wasn't the only one feeling lonely. I'm feeling lonely because of the
Totally.
deployment, but I'm not the only one feeling lonely. And I think it really, I don't know, it just created a little bit of peace in my mind as I realized other people were dealing with their own things alone too.
No, I think that's a really important and healthy lesson. I also had some uh, classmates in 2020, friends now, but they were also deployed and bringing this up to say that their return made their time away longer. And I'm just wondering if your husband had that where they had to come back and quarantine in like a gym
Hmm.
in the middle of nowhere. And then they hadn't gotten COVID, but then they did when they were quarantining. And then there was additional quarantining and then
Oh
coming home.
no.
And
So
so
that is, yeah, that's
yeah,
such a great question. It was so up in the air until the moment he returned. He returned in, actually, it got cut short a little bit. So he returned
oh,
in the
good.
end of June 2020. So, well, beginning of January to end of June. Is that 5 months? Roughly 5 months, I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
say. I think it was
yeah,
cut
about
short by
five
about a
months.
month. Yeah. So yeah. So he actually thought he might have to quarantine in a hotel. And then, very last minute, wonderfully for us and for others, they agreed that everyone could quarantine at home for 2 weeks. So he wasn't allowed to leave our house for 2 weeks. And at that point, again, Texas was opened up. You could kind of do things, you could go places. Of course, like, that was not a sacrifice for us. Like, we get to hang out for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This is great. We will happily do that. So
Mhm.
I fortunately did not have to deal with that, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And people who ended up in hotels, or even they had to quarantine if they stopped in other countries
Yeah,
and it was
right.
delayed, they would have to stay like 2 weeks if they stopped in the Canary Islands or in Spain or something. I remember having friend of a friend through the military endure something like that. Like, her husband was supposed to come home, but then they had to stay 2 extra weeks quarantining in another country. So just a weird time
Yeah,
for service
totally.
members to get back to their families. But we had a relatively smooth reintegration in that regard. And then
Good.
and we finished our time in Texas. We were there until the following spring. And then my husband found out he would be accepted as a warrant officer, which a lot of people are probably not familiar with that term. It's essentially just an officer in the military, but the way you got there is through the enlisted route instead of
Mm.
going to college first. So it's basically you've earned being an officer through experience and through deployments and through, they look at your career and they say, okay, like this is the officer route. So it's just kind of a alternate route to being an officer, if you will. That's really watering it down. Someone who's familiar with the military might be like, that's not quite it, but that's, I think, the easiest terms I can explain it in. So it was
Mm-hmm.
a really big honor. We were very excited for him. We were anticipating how to handle because he had schooling for another 5 months and we would probably be apart. And then I found out I was pregnant. And that was in spring of 2021, April 2021.
Oh,
And we were moving in 3 weeks later.
oh,
So I did end up going to Minnesota to stay with family until he completed his course. Roughly 4 or 5 months, I think it was. And then we moved to New York State from there and we bought a house. So fall 2021, we finally reunite. We're in New York State together. And I am pretty heavily pregnant in a new state, new place, but we bought a house, which was very exciting. And yes, we got to take advantage of the VA loan, as you mentioned
oh
earlier, which
yeah,
is
we
a
love a
huge,
VA loan.
wonderful perk for military spouses, families. Yes.
Wow, so you were away from your husband for the majority of your pregnancy then, but you were with family,
I
which
was with
sounds like an
family.
excellent choice.
Yes, I told my sister immediately. That was interesting because we had found out 3 weeks before we were moving. We scheduled a OB appointment right before he and I would part ways just to confirm the pregnancy in Minnesota. And then we confirmed it. We got to see baby on ultrasound. We came home and told all our parents, and then he left. So
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
like pregnant. Yeah, that was trying to do the math. It would have been no, May to September. So yeah, I mean, it was like 4 months of the pregnancy. I was with family. My sister and I are very close. So she was definitely a great support system,
Oh,
making sure I
good.
was eating all the right things and able to stomach all the right things. And my parents knew, and I started to tell friends a couple weeks later. And yeah, I felt so supported. I don't regret that choice at all because he had really long days in school. And I think it would have just been lonely, honestly, if
Oh
I would have kind
yeah.
of chased him around because he was in multiple locations as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have been moving a couple times. I'm not even sure the logistics of that. And I was just
Yeah,
like, I'm just gonna hang out with family. And again, yay
such a
for
smart
remote
choice.
work because
Yes.
I was still working. I had switched jobs at that point. A new position by choice, better pay, better everything. So that was cool. I got to make a choice to grow my career because I wanted to. And it was for
Mm-hmm.
a company I was excited about, and it was a better role. And that was a really cool experience to be able to choose that for myself instead
Yeah,
of, being forced to do something because of his career.
totally. I guess not to belabor the fact that you were apart from your husband for the majority of your pregnancy, but what was that like? I feel like this is another military spouse thing that I have observed with friends where it's like, he didn't get to be there to like in person watch your belly get bigger and go with you to the appointments, and not to in any way diminish the very active role that your sister had or the fact that you were loved on by your community, but can you talk about what that was like for you? And maybe what it was like for him too to not get to experience that.
Yeah, we were able to meet up once in the middle of that, right around the halfway point. He had a
Hmm.
long weekend break, so I flew down and met him in Florida. So there was a break where he got to see like my belly starting to grow a little bit, but
Okay, okay.
yeah, so it wasn't completely separate that entire time, but I mean he did miss all the appointments. He did miss like the big 20-week ultrasound. Um, I think it was so first, I want to say I had a very smooth pregnancy. I only had a little
Love.
bit of nausea right at the beginning. And I mean, I'm talking maybe 2 weeks of it, and then it went away. I really lucked out in that regard. I had a very healthy baby the whole time um, that I was pregnant. So
Good.
that made things easier. I think there was always a little bit of anxiety before I went to an appointment to confirm that everything was okay. And it was sad and it was kind of hard to not have my partner beside me. I do think the one thing with time, and as you can kind of hear from this story, we have dealt with time apart many times. We have found coping mechanisms. Maybe I'd call him right before I walked in. If he was available, I'd shoot him a text. I try to communicate with him through all means possible so he could kind of feel like he's a part of it. I know I took videos. I asked if I could take videos. The ultrasound, she like made sure to send me videos. She tried to take
Love that.
extra for him. They really went above and beyond because they knew, he was serving and he wasn't able to be there. And I I feel like we found ways to cope that made it more manageable. But yeah, there's definitely disappointment and to not have him there. The one thing that really sucked, I did have to do the glucose tests. I'm not sure if you're
Hmm.
familiar with that from other friends. I almost fainted from that. And
Oh
that was the
no.
one time I would say I just so badly wished that I had had him there. And that would have been so nice to have like that support of my spouse while I was dealing with that. And he showed up, we reunited a week after that test. So
Okay.
that was like a little bit of just, I should have scheduled that after you came home. But otherwise, yeah, I think we had developed at that point great communication methods to get through moments that we wished we could be together.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And what I guess what it highlights for me too is that as you're going on this journey in your relationship, very much informed by your husband being in the military, is you are continuing to be just like cultivating your own sense of independence. Seems like you've been an independent person your whole life, thinking for yourself, but like really, where you're able to have your experiences and appreciate them. And when he can be there and be a part of it, that's awesome. But when he can't, like life's like you're still living an enriched life. You're not like
Yes.
waiting, looking out the window. When is he coming home? You're doing.
Percent. Yes,
Hmm.
yes. That is such a good way to summarize it. And I think that's exactly how it felt. For some of the appointments, the bigger ones, I think I felt nerves. But for just the standard checkups, I think I was just, texting him, calling him, sending him videos, and just continuing on with our day, counting down to when we would see each other again.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. So then you moved to upstate New York. You're
Yes.
pregnant.
Yes.
Take us from there.
Yeah, so we reunite September 2021. And then by December of 2021, we welcome our son, Jack. Let me back up just a little bit. So maybe a month after he gets to the new unit and the new base, and he starts to meet everyone he's working with, here's the plan. He comes up to me and says, "Hey, there's going to be a deployment next year." We
Oh,
knew when we decided to have a child while he was still in the military that there was a high probability of this happening at some point. I feel that I handled this news very calmly. I still remember the day he told me. I remember just being very logical about it. He'll be there for the birth, he'll be there for the newborn stage. Our son would be roughly 4 months when he left. This would be okay. This would be okay. And
yes,
so
yeah.
I just focused on, I also didn't want to stress myself out in pregnancy too much. So I really just decided
Yeah.
that we were not going to worry about it until it was here. And so we welcomed our son the end of December. I was so glad my husband was there for the birth. I had a slightly traumatic birth. I know you've covered that on your podcast as
Yeah.
well. I did have a slightly traumatic birth. I've worked through it in therapy since.
Well, we love therapy.
I'd say I had a big plug for therapy here.
Yes.
I've very much am able to talk about it now without too much emotion behind it because I just logically kind of knew I made the best choice for my baby and me and our health. And I was so glad my husband was there and there in
Mm.
the early stages because I ended up with a C-section and I just could not imagine dealing with healing from a C-section without my partner there to do quite literally everything for me, including bring me baby at all times. So that was huge that he could be there for that. And I'm always grateful that of all this craziness with the military, a time away did not line up with the birth of our son. Yeah. Then we go through the newborn stage, very typical. Newborn doesn't sleep a lot, but I have, the support of my spouse. We had lots of visitors in those first few months. And then he did ultimately deploy April of 2022 when my son was 4 months old. And this
That's such.
was the hardest deployment, hands down, without a doubt. There is nothing like having to be responsible for a baby and really having to just stamp down all the anger and sadness you feel and focus entirely on this little being who depends on you for survival.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And right at 4 months old, a lot of babies are like getting their personality and starting to like maybe have like a few little words. I know every baby's different too, but I just imagine not that there's ever a good time, but that had to have been just so heart-wrenching for both you and your husband.
Yeah, it was a tough one. That goodbye was very hard for us. Yeah, it was very hard.
Mm,
I remember the first day I was basically, I don't use this word lightly. It felt like just being very low, being very depressed day one. I just
yeah.
was like, how am I going to do this for, at this time, the deployment would be 8 months. We knew that as well. And again, typical deployments are often upwards of 9 months. I've never endured a full 9 month deployment. So I just want to say there are spouses who deal with even longer than I have. It's just how
Hmm.
things have worked out in my husband's various units. But this would be an 8 month one. And I did have a trip to Minnesota planned for a month in June. And this was the end of April. So I really just tried to focus on that trip and like just get yourself through that trip. I would say from April to June till I left, it was a hard time. It was a hard
Hmm.
time. I had two visitors that came, which was one of my sisters and then a good friend of mine. And I think they both saw me sobbing at various points because
Yeah.
it's just hard. But after I went to Minnesota for a month and had again family, my parents, my sister, friends, so many people support me for a month in Minnesota. I had ended up having two weddings and a baby shower that month. So I'm like, I'm just going to
No.
Minnesota for the month. Like, we're just going to live
Yeah.
here. Yeah. My sister, had offered, she's like, you can stay here through the deployment. Like, you can, I think I just needed that help for a month to gather myself and get my bearings and decide I'm going to go into this more positively. I am going to be more intentional about making friends. I am going to utilize a babysitter. I am going to lean on the village of daycare. Praise my daycare. I had the best daycare in the world. They are
Oh.
incredible people. The director was my neighbor. They truly saved me through that deployment. But I
Mm.
just vowed to stop just trying to get by and really
Hmm.
do more to make this work and try to be more positive. And of course, anyone in my situation, it's very hard. And I'm not saying I wasn't trying hard enough. I think I had a little bit of a bad attitude about it the first couple months. And I wanted to make memories with my son that were happier and more positive. So when I returned from Minnesota in the back half of that deployment, those last 6 months, I feel like I did a lot better. And we might have just been getting our flow down too, just the two of us. I think we were establishing our own patterns and systems. I also, this might be a little oversharing, but I did decide to stop breastfeeding, which was a huge, huge mental thing for me at that time. I made it to 6 months and my son was struggling, I was struggling, and the introduction of formula was truly life-saving mentally for me. And it allowed me to he was sleeping better after that. And sleep is
Good.
vital to new moms. So, yeah, I think it was just a series of decisions I made after my Minnesota trip that helped get me through the end of that deployment to the end of 2022 when my
Hmm.
husband returned. So, definitely a hard time. No, I mean, I have incredible memories with my son, though. I have so many photos. I have so many visitors who came. Anyone who visited
Oh.
in that window has now earned like Hall of Fame, incredible
Yes.
friends, family. I will never forget you and what you did for me, but definitely a difficult time.
And for so many reasons, I mean, not a medical professional, but when I think about postpartum and like getting back to whatever normal is supposed to be after you have a baby, I just can't like your brain and your body and your breastfeeding and your husband's. But I have to say, Camille, you do such a good job of like leaning towards your people. Like that's when at every part of your story, you're like, I'm finding my people. Maybe it's my coworkers. Maybe it's the people that are around me here. You do a really good job of doing that. And I feel like anybody, even if they're not a military spouse, could benefit from that mentality of like, I am here. I want to be there. I'm going to let my people be near me, or I'm going to seek people out. I'm going to enjoy the people that I'm with. So I feel like you
Yeah.
have a really good, like, you seem to just have a really good knack for that.
I think connections, I mean, and we might touch on this later. That's what's really, I mean, there's a lot of things about being a military spouse that again, I think my husband and I have formed a really good foundation, having a
Totally.
career. But to your point, there has been connections and people that I have met and friendships I've leaned into that have changed my life. I mean, I can think of a
Absolutely.
person at each base, whether it's a coworker or a fellow military spouse. I had a friend in Texas who wouldn't have survived the pandemic or any time there. I mean, I owe her so much. I was like sick at one point and she brought me soup to my door. And I just have
Oh,
these people who I think have changed my life forever. And
mm-hmm.
it is vital for anyone, to your point, but
Mm-hmm.
especially when you frequently lose community as a military spouse, you're just
Yeah.
uprooted. You're just taken away from everything you
Mm-hmm.
know. You have to lean into finding people somehow, some way. A big part of the people I met in upstate New York, I'm actually connected with this group before my husband deployed, like right before, was a book club that I ultimately ended up running and had the best time.
Yeah.
They were some of the just like the most incredible people, and they really helped me without knowing when I was postpartum and when I was, because I went to that first book club meeting when I was like 8 weeks postpartum, and I just needed something. And it was incredible to just be surrounded by women. And I think this is when my perception of spouses really started to shift. And I realized that
Mm.
all of these people, they are, spouses are not a monolith. They are not all a certain political stance. They are not all certain values. They are not all, mothers. Some of these women are childless by choice and don't intend to have kids. And some of them, have careers, some don't. And it was all of these people who were bonded by books. And we were all affiliated with the military. And it was like eye-opening to me because I spent a number of years just having certain perceptions, thinking I could only align myself with women who voted the same way I did or who believed in career the same way I did. And I was wrong because these people were there for me emotionally and encouragement wise in ways, whether we agreed or not, whether we wanted to be mothers or not, in ways that I had really underestimated. And that book club, again, Fortran Book Club, shout out to you
Mm.
guys. I told them on my last meeting, I'm like, I'm not going to cry. And then now I feel like this is the tears I didn't have at the meeting are coming out now as I remember all these women. It was an incredible group of people. And like you said, connection, like all we're looking
Yeah.
for, right, in life is just connection with people. And yeah, I definitely found that in that book club.
Gosh, there's so many things I love about that. Just reading people to bringing people together, that is just like will always have a spot in my heart.
Yes.
And then the just like circles of women helping each other, women helping women. Are you kidding me? I love that. And then what you're saying about how we like sometimes I think that we have these perceptions about other people in order to protect ourselves and maybe we think we're living in our values by cutting people out or not opening ourselves up to people with different ideas. But if you would have done that, you would have cut yourself off from so much love and support, and you learned from them and you permitted them to be there for you. And I just feel like that, especially in the time that we're living in right now, where there's just so much polarization,
Yeah.
just, remember that when you cut yourself off, it goes two ways. And
Mm-hmm.
you never know what you could be missing out on. Of course, empowering
100%.
people to take care of themselves, do what you need to do, but
It's,
it's
yeah,
a
it's,
and that's
yeah.
just like amazing to me that you were able to just receive so much love in that setting and at that really vulnerable time for you.
Yeah, I can definitely like attribute just surviving that deployment between daycare and book club. Those were my people, and a lot of them know it. I mean, I've told and I've said that, these groups have really helped me so much. I've thanked my daycare provider and teachers so many times that I can't even, I'm so grateful for them.
Mm.
But yeah, so that kind of propelled me to the end of that deployment.
Yeah.
That was when we were talking before about the pandemic causing.
Hmm.
My husband was supposed to get home December 3rd, and a massive, massive snowstorm hit upstate New York. This was the end of 2022. I feel like even the Pacific Northwest had a crazy ice storm
Oh,
during
we
this.
did. Yep.
Yes, I have a friend who
Hmm.
was in Portland and she was skating down her street or something.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I
it was like
remember
that. Yeah, people were without
The
power.
whole country was in
Yeah,
this insane, like, cyclone of winter. And my
right.
husband could not get home for Christmas. And the
Oh,
frustration I felt, that was one of the, man, I had handled everything so well. I was so mentally strong. And then him not getting home for Christmas was, he was so upset. I was so upset. Our son was clueless. He was almost a year old. He was having the time of his life, you know? He didn't mind
yeah.
at all. He just FaceTime grandparents all day. We saved
Yeah.
Christmas. He came home the
Sweet.
26th, and it was a beautiful, awesome reunion. And we had 4 feet of snow, 3 feet of snow. I mean, it was a
My gosh.
crazy amount of snow. We're by Buffalo,
Oh,
just on the
yeah.
other side of the lake. Yeah, so we just get insane snow up there. But he made it home. We celebrated Christmas later. Our son had no idea, thankfully, because he was just shy of a year old. And he did make it home for our son's birthday, which is December 30th. So we did get to
Oh,
celebrate
good.
one thing.
I was sweating that one a little bit. I was like, uh-oh,
Yes, he
he was
made
born
it.
in
He,
December.
he made it for the first birthday party, which was just us, literally us, the
Yeah.
parents and him, but which was perfect. And yeah, so that kind of closed out the year. Since the deployment, we basically had just lived in upstate New York and kind of got to enjoy it. My husband
Hmm.
didn't have another deployment. He didn't even have too much training. I think there was one brief, maybe like 5-week training program like last summer, but we were
Mm.
together a lot, which was so cool after being apart for 8 months of
Yeah.
my son's life.
Hmm.
He just got to be really involved. And then we found out in this past spring, spring of 2024, no, found out in summer, sorry, let me correct myself, June 2024, that we were moving to Hawaii.
My goodness. Hawaii. And actually, I've been wanting to ask this question at each part of your move. So I know that there's like some choice that you have and some choice you don't have. Do you mind just helping lay
Yeah,
people who don't know about that, like what that really means? Where it's like that was one of our
yeah.
choices, but really
So
Uncle
they
Sam still kind of chooses.
My husband calls it needs of the army,
Oh,
essentially. So
that sounds so noble.
yes, I think it's to keep me from getting too heated when I see
Yeah.
places I don't want to
Yeah.
on the list. Essentially, when you come up to the window in which you are going to PCS, it's called the permanent change of station, in which you change the location you're at currently. The cycle is decided by someone much higher than us. We are not sure. I mean, there's a logic behind it, but I am not sure of the particulars on why it's every 2 to 3 years for my husband's career, but it is. So when that window comes, they essentially assess all the open positions that they are able to fill for my husband's rank and then his job. And then you get a list and you get to rank them. It's a little different process for others. If you're coming out of a school, the ranking system might be different, or they might just assign you something. When we got Texas, we were just told. I mean, it was just a, hey, you're going to Texas. We
You're
didn't
going
even
to
get a
Texas.
vote.
Okay.
This past time, we got a list, and Hawaii was on there along with a handful of southern states and then Korea. And we basically just kind of assessed our options and said, you know what, Hawaii sounds cool and warm, and he had a connection there. And so we ranked it number one, but that does not guarantee that you
Yeah.
will go there.
Yeah.
But then we found out maybe 6 weeks after ranking that we did indeed get Hawaii. So that was very fun, very cool surprise. We were super stoked about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, after living here, and I don't know, I might be jumping forward in the story.
You're good.
It's not all, rainbows and sunshine. I think anywhere you live, you still have to live there. It is not a permanent vacation, which I think I didn't go into it thinking that, but I definitely have friends who check up on me and they're like, hey, how's it going? Are you having the best time ever? Well, some days. After
Yeah.
we found out we were getting Hawaii, we sold our house, or we worked on selling our house. And then I had to make a tricky decision because the company I worked for actually only worked in certain time zones. It was in their contract.
Sure.
And when I told them that I would be moving to Hawaii, they tried to make accommodations for me. But the point at which they were willing to do that was basically I had to work East Coast hours or quit. And this is 5 to 6 hours time difference. And I start at 8, 9 a.m. So I'd be starting at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning.
My Lord. Woo.
I want to
Yeah.
be clear, I wasn't let go, but they basically put me in a position that I kind of felt like my hands were tied, and
Yeah.
I had a long conversation with my husband, and I really had to assess the priority and the magnitude of this move. And I
Hmm.
chose to resign from that position
Yeah.
to support my family and my son. This might be another topic we could probably go off on for a very long time, but it has been difficult to find a position since then, since I chose to resign. I did not realize how difficult it would be. I think I underestimated how many companies are going in office instead of offering remote opportunities anymore. And the Hawaii job market is different than what you might expect. Yeah, I mean, this move was very exciting. And people hear Hawaii, I mean, they're just grinning at you like, beach life, amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, once again, this goes back to being a spouse. I had to sacrifice a career. And, people could point out, I have sisters who are very blunt with me. This is how we talk to each other. And they're like, well, you could have kept your job. And, I could have, but I felt that my hands were tied and it didn't feel worth it to me with what I needed to do to make this company happy.
Yeah.
It didn't feel
Yeah.
worth it to me. And so, yeah, it's just another example of, there's a lot of sacrifices spouses make to support, career James. Also, the position that was available was a great one for my husband advancing his
Hmm.
career. So it wasn't just the allure of Hawaii. I want to be
Yeah.
clear. There was a position here that he was excited about taking as well. And yeah, it is, there's really exciting, fun times living in Hawaii. There's beautiful palm trees. We were at the beach yesterday. It was incredible. It was warm while everyone's enduring, negative temps back home in Minnesota.
Hmm.
But it's also, a dead end job market for me as I'm applying and being ghosted by companies. And I think just bringing awareness to the fact that it's not always as dreamy as it might look on an Instagram photo of a sunset is
Hmm.
something I really want people to know. I mean, I am reaching a point where I may have to take a position significantly lower than my qualifications and skills and experience. And that's hard to reconcile with. That is disappointing after everything I've put into my career. And it honestly sometimes feels like a failure of the systems around us, not recognizing how important military spouses could be to local job markets and the advantages that we could bring to communities if there were better connections and opportunities and companies that recognize maybe I could work on a different timetable and still work
Hmm.
for you guys. And again, it was in the contract, I understand, but it's just sometimes it is disappointing.
Yeah, that is really disappointing. And I think I want to respond to just a couple things there. First on the Hawaii of it all, I know I was like, hearts in my eyes. Oh, Hawaii, I can see the white sands now. But Hawaii also is a state where there is a lot of poverty and there's a lot of socioeconomic divide, and that can make the environment challenging. Love Hawaii, not trying to say anything negative about Hawaii, but I think people do think about like the tourism and not like the native peoples that have gone through what many native groups, if not all native groups, have gone through in in North America, in the United States.
Absolutely. Yes.
Additionally, I think it was last week or the week before, the Wall Street Journal reported 1.6 million people, and I believe it was from layoffs, which I know that you are to the side of, but that
Yeah.
have are out of work. These are people like you and I. We have college degrees, and 50% of those are people who have been unemployed for more than 6 months, and it is a white collar recession. I know you saw it coming when you started talking about it, but yeah, it's very close to my heart because same as you, like I got laid off in May, and the job market for somebody who, like you, also just worked really, really hard for her career and took a lot of pride in it, and maybe a little too over-identified with like what the job was. But it's all, I guess all that to say, I'm glad that you brought that up because it is a really, really tough market. I think that the contraction of employers wanting people to be back in the office really they're making choices to keep themselves from good talent like you. Or I'd also say and like me.
Like you, like you. Yes,
Like both of us.
absolutely.
And I just think there's so many people right now that are having to make some really tough choices because of this job market. And so this is another thing to your point earlier about like being alone together. It feels so good for me to talk about it with people who are also like, I'm doing everything I can, but I am striking out left and right. What's going on? It's like, it's not you. It is the market. It's been
When
the
we
market.
when we first connected and you shared your story or a glimpse of your story with me, I genuinely felt so seen and just like, okay,
Same.
there's someone else who is out here who has a career, who has degrees, who is struggling. And I have not, been in the position quite as long as you have been, just dealing with it since early October. So we're
Yeah.
coming into 4 months now. And it's just, yeah, it's alarming because I've searched for jobs before and I have a reasonable callback to send out ratio for my resume and for interviews. And this is not that. Whatever is happening now seems problematic for this group. So it's very interesting to hear about, yeah, that about the white collar recession and just
Yeah.
a lot of people in this position. It's sad but it's good to know. I guess I'm not alone here
hmm
as I search.
You're definitely not alone. It was one of those things where even like seeing the Wall Street Journal publish those numbers, I was like, finally, a major news source is reporting how widespread this recession is for white collar educated workers. I also was talking to one of my mentors who has anecdotally been observing this and other people. She works for the University of Oregon, and she was like, it seems like it's also impacting more women.
Mm,
And she wasn't trying to like say any, she was definitely trying to like validate it. She's like, I'm
yeah.
noticing that more women who are laid off or have to make a choice like you did about maintaining an employment status are not finding that work again, and that men are. And again, she's
Mhm.
seeing it from like 10,000 feet
Yeah,
through an
yeah.
alumni network. Just for whatever that's worth. It made me feel good. I'm gonna
Yeah,
hold on to it and be like,
yeah.
okay, like there are a few things working against us here.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't think to your point where I'm, someone listening, maybe they resonate with this too. It's
Yeah, I hope so.
disheartening, for moments. I wonder if I made the wrong choice, but then I remember that my family was going through a huge transition. My son had his whole life uprooted, everything he knew, his home, his daycare, his friends, absolutely just changed in an instant. And, we could probably talk for hours about the effects of military life on children. And I don't love
Yeah.
to see it. It's part of why we waited so long. We were together and married for 9 years before we chose to bring a child into the equation. And, that was part of it. So I knew I wanted to be there to support him. And I don't regret my choice, but it's tricky. It's really tricky now to balance because the full-time daycare or preschool program is out of our budget as we assess what long-term unemployment for me could look like, but then jobs aren't appearing and leads aren't, coming to fruition. So it's a messy cycle.
I'm sorry that you and your family are being impacted by this. And I'm also, in case I didn't respond to it before, your former employer offering you the accommodation. Like you can't have it. I mean, I'm sure you could have a little one and wake up at 2:30 in the morning.
I think there are people who do it, and I think there are
Oh, it's
people who
so
may be more
hard.
determined than me who wanted to. It was, yeah,
Man, that
it didn't feel
seems
like a reasonable solution for our family. It might be a reasonable solution had we not had a child, potentially, if we had moved to Hawaii in a different time in our life, if the circumstances were different. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about Hawaii. I know in past, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get the thing, the past permanent change of station, PCS. It sounds like you've purchased homes, but I believe that you mentioned that you are on base in barracks for this state.
the base itself, this station is called Schofield Barracks. That's just the name of it. It's kind of an odd one. We are
Oh, I was
in
so confused.
we are in military housing for the first
You
time.
are okay.
And when I say that my husband and I we were so anti-military housing prior to this, I mean, we would have lived in pretty, like, way too small for us, rundown homes before we pursued this. But we were in a different position. Once we knew that I would be resigning, once we made that decision, it was clear that our financial situation to live in the most expensive state in America, I
Oh,
have
that
verified
too.
this, yes,
Yeah.
We knew that living on base would save us from electric bills and garbage bills and sewer and water. And that is a big chunk of change, especially in a state that
Yeah, it
is
is.
consistently 80 degrees every day. And I don't want to sleep in 80 degrees.
No,
So,
thank you.
yes, we are running AC here and there. So, we made the decision to live on post for, to be blunt, mostly monetary reasons. It's different. I mean, it's definitely the first time I feel like my husband's work and personal life has intersected a bit in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, I mean, he can bike to work, which is cool because we are able to be a one-car family at the moment until we decide our next move. We were able to sell a vehicle in the mainland and just bring one car over here. Just to note, the military only pays for one car to move. We would have had to pay ourselves for the other car. It is not cheap to send your vehicle over here. So we decided to
Wow.
just eliminate that expense and just be a one car family for a little while. So my husband is able to bike to work, but there's also, I mean, you're living on streets according to rank, which is very interesting. Your neighbors are the same rank as you, and then when you go down a different street, it's different ranks, and it's a very hierarchy system that I think is hard for me to wrap my head around, even though I have lived in this. And I'm sure to the civilian world, it is bonkers. But there are perks too. I find some of just the uniformity of it odd. It's very much like cookie cutter housing. I
Mm-hmm.
would say though, it's very nice. It's nice, but you're in duplexes. They're near each other. Yards are smaller. We had a lovely house in New York with like a big plot of land. We had like 0.75 acres. So that shift to just a tiny backyard is
Yeah.
it's been a little bit of a challenge. To be fair, what we could afford off post would be no backyard. So we
Mm.
have made concessions. But I mean, there are perks. We're walking distance from a grocery store, and there's a public library right nearby, and it's very walkable on base. There's sidewalks everywhere, which is nice. It's safe. There's a lot of perks too, but I feel sometimes I'm grappling with just a very change in my environment. I'm usually assimilating with good communities I'm in a lot more. I'm not doing that here. It's different. It's very different. Not good or bad, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. I think the positives and cons kind of cancel themselves out. It's a very neutral switch, but it was a very financially conscious decision. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we made the right one for the position we're in, especially in light of the job search situation I alluded to earlier.
Yeah, definitely sounds like once again you made the best decision for your family. My
Yes.
jaw dropped when you talked about ranked housing, though. I had literally, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, did you not know? Did I really not know that? I did not know that. I did
Yeah,
not know
there's
that.
sometimes it's neighborhoods, here it's streets. So it's like all the same street. Your neighbors will typically be the same type of rank. My husband's a warrant officer, so all of our neighbors are warrant officers. It's very interesting.
That
Yes.
is
Enlisted,
interesting.
live in their own area, typical like the more traditional officer paths live in their own streets. Yeah, again, I was clueless to this world before I married into it. So I
Yeah.
definitely find it odd. My husband grew up on military housing though. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
he lived in military housing. So to him, he has fabulous memories of, gangs of kids on bikes riding
Mm,
around and going to the playground together. And just like he has really fun memories because it's so safe. And it is. I mean, we see that similar thing in our neighborhood, which maybe you don't see in like normal suburbia anymore. I think a lot of people might not always trust their kids to ride outside, but it feels very much like a 90s classic neighborhood here. So there
mm,
are definite, pros, I would say. But yeah,
mm-hmm.
it's different. It's definitely different and kind of a product of our circumstances that we're in it, military housing. But I also think we've made friends through our neighbors, and that's been really cool too. Yeah, again,
That
just
is cool.
pros and cons. Probably not something we do again. I think it was just like our circumstances here in Hawaii just necessitated this needing to happen.
Yes. So you are 12 years into this military journey, and I guess this is a two-part question. Do you know how long you will be in Hawaii? And and again, maybe this is something that is your husband's to talk about, or you don't discuss it, but how long do you think he's gonna career out and stay in his whole life in the military, and this will just be part of your life too? Or do you think he'll retire sometime? Because it's what, like 20 years is one of the
Hmm.
marks? It's coming up sooner, I guess.
We'll be in Hawaii for 3 full years.
Okay.
We'll be eligible to PCS leave roughly fall, winter of 2027, I think
Hmm.
that math works out to. So 3 years here since we just moved here in October. And then as far as my husband, the length of time, we had a very in-depth discussion about this when he was deployed in 2020 about what we wanted our future to look like and whether we wanted to have him pursue this or whether we wanted him to get out. And we did make the decision to have him be a career military, but that does actually come with an end date. And when he hits the 20-year mark, he will be eligible for retirement.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the retirement with the military, if people aren't familiar, is very good in terms of you are very secure for the rest of your life. He will only be 38 years old, so he will for sure embark on a secondary career, kind of part two, season two of his life, of his career. But yeah, we do intend, or he intends to stay in for that full 20. And we're already at 13 this year, so it just kind of feels like a natural
Yeah.
7 years left. I mean, to be fair, when our son was a baby, it didn't quite feel so
Yeah.
uplifting for me when he was deployed. I didn't know if I was fully on board anymore with the plan, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think as long as, barring any crazy circumstances, by the time we leave Hawaii, there'll be 4 years left. And so it's just kind of a home run to the end and hopefully being able to live somewhere we absolutely love, like Washington or Minnesota or yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like Washington State or Minnesota is waiting for you. It sounds like you have a lot
Yes.
of people there that love you and
Yes.
would be happy to have you home.
Yes, definitely.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Camille. Let's just take a quick break and then we'll be right back. We are back from our break, and before we stepped aside, Camille and I were just talking about how she and her husband have made the thoughtful, intentional decision to have this military career be one that her husband pursues into retirement. Or to retirement, I should say, when he hits that 20-year mark. And we, as the uniquely qualified community, just look forward to seeing where the rest of Camille and her family's journey takes them. And with that, Camille, let's turn into the final show questions.
Sounds good.
If you could go back to right before you became a military spouse, what would you say to that younger version of yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, I think the biggest thing I would tell myself, the most important, the most pivotal that has carried me through all of this is just that the love is worth it. My husband is an incredible partner. He's supportive. He's just a really steadfast individual in my life. And through all of, the sacrifices I've made, he's respected it and seen that and tried to give me space and encouragement. And I have never not felt entirely supported by whatever decision I make as I have supported his career. And we do have a really incredible connection. So even though I was so young and there was a lot of doubt and a lot of, not from me, but from other people who looked in
Hmm.
on us as being just a really young couple getting married, I think just knowing my gut instinct was right and this was the real deal, like you're on the right path. Don't worry. Try not to care what people think.
The love is worth it. Are you kidding me? Whew, I love it. Wow. Okay, question two. What tool or resource has been the most helpful in navigating your experience as a military spouse?
Yeah, I'd say we kind of touched on this a little bit. And I mean, you kind of called it out in a good way, which is so funny because I had it written down. But the number one thing that has helped me navigate being a military spouse is finding connections and community wherever I live. I think having your people or having a person, literally a person to support you and be a friend and someone nearby that you can grab coffee with or a drink with or go on a hike with, and just having a person, whether they're going through it or not, is so vital. And military spouses have to try twice as hard because we move into situations where we don't know people. And it has never not been worth it for me to pursue a friendship, whether I am downloading Bumble BFF and searching, or whether I'm joining a new book club, very, very newly postpartum. It has always been worth it to make connections with people, make friends, ask someone to hang out. Those have really carried me through.
Connections and community. We love to see it. That is the good stuff of humanity. And finally, if anyone is relating to your story, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so if there's a fellow military spouse or someone who is in maybe a spouse in an adjacent career where your husband or wife is giving a lot of their time and energy and resources to their career, and you're kind of just, there's even a name for you, a military
Yeah.
spouse. I think there's other groups that can probably relate to this too. I think just knowing better, we know, military spouses know better than anyone that everything is a season and change is always around the corner. So whether you're at a duty station you don't like, or a deployment that feels like it won't end, or a job search that feels like it won't end, or even a particularly like hard season of parenthood, or trying to conceive, I think
Yeah.
that being a military spouse, we know more than the average population that like change is inevitable. And
Hmm.
so this feeling in this moment, it's not going to last forever, and we will get through it. And so just try to hold on to the good stuff while it's here, because it's fleeting. I just think I have definitely learned that like a lot better than I think like the average person. Also, I did not expect to cry this much while talking to you on this episode. I feel like it's just like you're an incredible host, and I feel like I'm
Oh, thank you.
just hitting some things that just really resonate with me, because it has been my life for the last decade. And if someone can relate to this, I just hope like we are very resilient. Military spouses
Hmm.
are just incredibly resilient people.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much. And you or anybody who cries on the podcast, listening to the podcast, like this is a place to feel. And I'm just so glad that you feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing this, because it's so important that we understand members of our communities. And like we said, 10% of people in the United States right now are either a veteran, active duty, or married to one of those two, men and women. And so we can all just be a little bit kinder. I also feel like, I definitely don't mean to be talking over what you said about like relating to your story,
Mhm.
but like a huge thing I feel like I'm walking away from this episode with is that saying, people, okay, I'm gonna totally make this a Liz Ficken version, not like anybody else, but like people aren't gonna care like that your hair was messy or that you gained a few pounds or what your title was at your job. They're gonna care how you made them feel. Like you remember how those women in that book club made you feel, how they showed up for you, how they held space for you. You remember how the people at that first Fairbanks job were like your people and they helped you get through that first really hard time. And so like that's like when we think about ourselves and how we show up in the world, we can be amazing and be like you, and we can also be like those people. And I just think that that's just like I'm
Yeah.
getting a little emotional too because I didn't expect it. But it's just this is the world that we want to be building. Is
Yes,
is
yes.
that.
That's such a good like summation of, yeah, the connections I've made, the people, like we can be those people for other people. We can be that person they remember as, wow, you're the one who helped me like get through that time.
Yeah. Well, Camille, thank you so much for your service as a military spouse, truly. Thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. And for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and learning from Camille and her journey as a military spouse. If you don't already, please follow Uniquely Qualified on Spotify. And if you feel so moved, would love a 5-star review. We are on Instagram as Uniquely Qualified Pod. And I just ask if you know somebody who's a military spouse or married to a veteran, share this episode with them. I almost guarantee you're going to find something in common with Camille and it might make us feel just a little more connected and less alone. And also, if you've overcome a challenge like being a military spouse and you'd like to share it with our listeners, please reach out to me. You can direct message me on Instagram or you can email me at uniquelyqualifiedpod@gmail.com. We are all about amplifying people's voices and allowing people to feel heard and to be seen, and you are welcome here. And please remember that no matter what, we are all uniquely qualified.